Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
I'm Matt Miller.
And I'm Hannah Elliott, and this is Hot Pursuit.
First of all, I need to correct something from last week.
Go for it. My
man, Dennis, sent us an email about his forever car, the Porsche that he didn't even drive until he bought it, and now he's like so in love with the 997.2 C4S.
Okay.
And I called him Dan in the last show.
Oh, sorry, Dennis.
Yes, exactly. And it just reminds me that we love to get emails from listeners, and they really do spur ideas.
Yes.
For segments. So like if you have an idea or if you have a hot take or if you have, a guest that you might want to hear. A guest suggestion. From. Exactly. Sure. Please email us at
hotpursuit@bloomberg.net.
Yes.
And we personally see and read each email.
Yeah, and I love them. I, get thousands of emails every day. They're mostly from people at work. They're mostly from flacks who are like pitching stuff that I'm never going to do. But when I see one from a listener, I'm like, oh, yes. Yeah, and I read it and I'm excited and I drop whatever I'm doing usually and write back. So, email us at hotpursuit@bloomberg.net and we're highly likely to action your suggestion.
Yes, we are.
Otherwise, you went to a show that I guess had much cooler cars.
Well, yeah, I went to, this is the third annual Win Concours in Las Vegas. And I just found it so interesting because this is a new concours. Most of the concours that we go to, like Amelia Island or Pebble Beach or Villa d'Este or any of these big major concours have been around for decades. And this is one that it's in its third year, and it's really a group of people who don't necessarily have a ton of deeply embedded car background running car events. However, it's the Wynn Hotel, and if there's one thing they do perfectly, it's hospitality. And hospitality and service and culture are often the elements that are missing at car shows. So it's really interesting to see this new sort of baby car show grow. And I had a lot of fun. I saw Dita Von Teese there, actually. She's secretly, not actually secretly, but little known, she's a car person. So that was cool. And I did some driving with Rolls-Royce we can talk about later while I was there too. But the Concours was interesting.
I just tried to click on Dita.net and I
probably
was blocked. But wait, she's got famous initially for being a burlesque dancer, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes,
she did marry Marilyn Manson.
Yes, she did.
And they're no longer married.
That's correct. She's from Detroit. Back in the day when I was still at Forbes, I went to her house and did a series of videos with her driving some of her old American cars. And I remember she was in full on Dita Von Teese gear, including like 5-inch heels, and drove me up to the top of Griffith Observatory. And I'll have to send you the video, Matt. It's really, my hair is quite a bit different shade than, but she was so cool and so down to earth and actually really knows her stuff, and talked about how she just couldn't stand if a guy came to pick her up on a date in a new car. She just thought that was the worst thing ever.
Why don't we have her on the podcast?
I've asked. I need to ask again. We should. She'd be really interesting. She's into it. I'm going to reach out again.
That is quite cool that she's super into cars. I kind of knew
call us.
I knew that she was super into cars because of her Detroit background.
Yeah.
So
really interesting.
And I would love to go to Vegas and see that car show. Because
Vegas is maybe kind of becoming a car hub.
Yeah.
Because between Formula One and this car concours and SEMA, which I think you would love, Matt, it's like there are some real car things happening there. We've got the LA Auto Show also happening in November, which is, a 4-hour drive from Vegas. There's a lot going on this month car-wise.
I went to a Lamborghini driving school in Las Vegas, which was phenomenal.
Cool. Which track?
I can't remember. This was in 2016, I'm going to say. And But SEMA I've never been to, and for me, like that would be, because I love American
Totally.
muscle. I love the
Aftermarket.
aftermarket. I love customization, and obviously SEMA is the
They would love you, Matt.
the show.
Yeah. I went once and that was enough for me. I realized, this isn't really, this isn't.
It's not the collector set.
I don't need to be here. Yeah, I don't need to be here. But it was fun while I was there. I was like, all right, I'm good. I got it.
Speaking of the collector set, we have an accomplished car collector and motorcycle also collector and restorer. So
Yes.
Philip Richter, I met him because he does a car show local to me in Bedford. That's called the Turtle Invitational. They do it every couple of years. And he invited me up. I went with my daughter, with Edna, and she loved it. But what she really loved is next door to the sort of farm where he does the car show is where they keep all the horses. So I brought her in there, and she instantly fell in love with these horses. And Philip was like, dude, that'll break the bank. Like, stay away from horses and lean on car collecting.
I was going to say, whenever I get around people who do horses and cars, or used to do horses and now they do cars, I always ask, which is more expensive? And they always say the horses, by far.
Yeah, exactly. I can't, like, my mind can't do those gymnastics, but because cars are so expensive to begin with.
I know.
But I believe him. So let's get to right now Philip Richter from the Turtle Invitational, and he's also on the board of the Revs Institute in Naples, Florida. Let's start by just going through the things that you do. You have such a long resume. I think of the Turtle Invitational just because I've been to it, and then I think of Malcolm Prey.
Tell us what Turtle Invitational is.
Right. So, start with that. Because
Hannah, this goes way back. So I grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut. My best friend when I was 6 years old was this kid named Malcolm Prey. And Malcolm's dad was literally the first independent Volkswagen, Porsche, Audi dealer in the country. Okay? So back in the 50s, when they used to sell a Lancia right next to a Volkswagen, right next to a 300 SL Gullwing, all these cars were sold in one foreign car dealership, right?
the imports.
So we're not
all
talking
the imports. Well, and Max
Hoffman.
Yeah, Max
of
Hoffman was
course.
importing all these cars. BMW 507s.
He might have been the first.
Yeah, and he and Malcolm were very close. And so Malcolm was working at this car dealership on the Post Road in Greenwich called Morley Motors. And Malcolm figured out that the only time people have time to go shop for cars is Sunday. But of course, all these dealerships are closed on Sunday. So he would work Sundays and sell like 6 or 7 cars. So he excelled right away and outpaced his peers. So ultimately, a guy named Harry Blanchard bought the dealership. Harry died in a Porsche accident in Argentina racing a 356, and Malcolm inherited the entire franchise. This all happened just as Volkswagen and Porsche were debating about having standalone dealerships. And so as Malcolm always told me, he said, I convinced the banks that I had the franchise, and I convinced the franchise I had the banks. And it all came together, and he became Prey, Porsche, Audi, Volkswagen on the Post Road in Greenwich. And he rode the wave of the Beetle, rode the wave of the 911, made a fortune, and had a huge customer base, and sold it all in 1999 for a lot of money. Anyway, so I was friends with Malcolm's son growing up. Tragically, Malcolm's son died in 1986 in a Golf GTI in a car accident in Greenwich, killed him and his friend. And that's when I became even closer to Mr. Prey, Malcolm's father. And we went to car shows all around the country together. He had an amazing collection of Delahaye's and Duesenbergs and Bugattis and even some, simple cars, MGs. A very eclectic collection, but cool, fun stuff. He had a 507. He had some really great Ferraris. And we would go to Pebble, and we would go down to Pennsylvania, and we'd go all to Florida, to Amelia. And that just got me super passionate about collector vehicles, the people that are engaged with these cars. There's a whole panoply of people are really interesting. And so that really began my passion for cars. The Turtle Invitational, fast forward, Malcolm died in 2013. The Turtle Invitational benefits the Malcolm Prey Foundation. the Prey Family Foundation, which has a educational facility in Bedford, New York, that still has a lot of the cars from his collection. We have an executive director who has a military background, Mary Kay Satriano. We run thousands of kids through the program. When Malcolm was alive, he had over 12,000 kids go through the program. And it's very basic. Look people in the eye when you shake their hand. Don't do drugs. Stay in school. Be passionate about something. Your reputation is your greatest asset. There were all these things that Malcolm used to be
It's
successful.
kind of like the Little Achievers, the Lebowski,
exactly.
the Lebowski Little Achievers. I've been to the Prey Foundation, and it's mostly school kids still that are going through there, right?
Mostly underprivileged.
It's in Bedford, and
right on the border of Bedford and Greenwich. And we
and that's where
focus
you
on-
have your car show as well.
Well, we have a dinner there during the Turtle Invitational. So the Turtle Invitational is a motoring weekend that's much more about the people than it is the cars, although we get great cars. And it's about camaraderie, and it's almost like a salon, or if you imagine like a Chautauqua that used to happen out in New York State, where you get together and people talk about lots of different things, some car-related, some not. My investment firm actually hosts a dinner Friday night, and we bring in a money manager that talks about the future of medicine or different things that are going on in the market, and we get a lot of very interesting people to come. But it's a charity benefit for the Prey Foundation, and we raise money to just bring more and more kids through the program. And it's not just underprivileged kids, it's overprivileged kids also, because they need help too.
What does
in this
that
day
mean,
and age.
overprivileged?
So, for example, I mean, there's a lot of kids in the kind of Fairfield, Westchester area that have unbelievable means. Their families have done very well successfully financially.
And they suffer from affluenza.
They suffer from affluenza, and sometimes they actually need a different, not something in school, not something from their parents, but something from somewhere else, and we provide that.
I have never thought that being born to great wealth is necessarily a blessing.
No,
Because
I concur.
The people who I know who have experienced that have their own challenges and difficulties, so I can understand that.
Yeah.
But back to the cars. So the reason I'm trying to sort this out is because you're doing so many different things. You have the Turtle Invitational, which is the car show in Bedford. You have the Malcolm Prey Foundation, which is the collection.
Yes.
And you also work with the Revs Institute, which in Naples, which is
Very distinguished.
a
Which
huge
I'm
museum. They have like an educational program which is really
Incredible.
big. And
Revs Ed. It's
so
unbelievable.
how did you get involved
Mike
with the Revs
Barbone runs
Institute, and what do you do there? Because you're so I have been talking with Philip for a couple of years now. You're so deep into collecting, restoration. You know all these little details that most people don't, and I guess that's part of the Revs Institute education.
Yeah, I know Mr. Collier has an incredibly different perspective on restoration and authenticity of vehicles and provenance and the importance of these automobiles as archaeological artifacts that are meaningful vehicles. I got involved with the Revs Institute actually through horses because I'm an equestrian show jumper and I'm treasurer of the United States Equestrian Team Foundation that funds and fields all the Olympic athletes to go abroad and compete for medals and get on the podium. And the Colliers have been, very generous in so many ways across lots of different activities. And I got to know them through the equestrian team. And then I went in 2017 to the Revs Symposium, which Mr. Collier holds every other year, which is an incredible gathering globally of all the thought leaders in the collector car universe. And there's panels and there's workshops and incredible entertainment. And there you have the archaeological automobile.
Yeah, I just pulled up on. So Philip gave me a book a while back, which is amazing, by Miles Collier, which is called The Archaeological Automobile, and it's really a great read.
Yeah, he has a whole different perspective. Miles would say that a lot of these cars that are restored are fiction because that ice cream cone that fell on the seat of that Duesenberg in 1938 has been reupholstered, and that is gone now. It's wiped from the history of the car because it's been restored. And that's not to say that restored cars aren't great, but he's a stickler for authenticity. When he restores, Hannah, you'll love this, and Magnus knows all this, but when he restores a Porsche, particularly the race cars, they're very careful to be true to the original construction of the vehicle. And back then, a lot of these cars were not perfectly assembled, right? Porsche.
We've talked about this a lot.
Yeah, they're very
you can over-restore things. It's pretty gross.
Yeah, and you have to make it so it can't be perfect because that's not how it left the factory.
Right.
And so the Revs Institute is very meticulous about these things. Incredible database of archives. We're still I think we have 4 giant storage facilities outside Naples full of documents, data, build sheets, letters from Enzo Ferrari to buyers that we still haven't even scanned yet to put in our archives. And if you go to revsinstitute.org, you can search these databases, photographs. We recently bought the Jesse Alexander collection, so all those amazing images from the 50s and 60s of Grand Prix racing and Formula One and all kinds of racing. We have all that. And oftentimes we get inbound calls from Europeans who are restoring these cars, and we can find the cars in the period, and we can show them images of what they exactly looked like. And if that dent was in the hood, that's still there in 1953 in that race in Le Mans or whatever it is.
So, Philip, do you restore yourself, your own cars?
Well, yes, and I mostly restore pre-war BMW motorcycles. And when I say I restore them, I find the best people in the country or the world, with those it's global, who build certain parts of those bikes. So rim builders, speedometer restoration, paintwork, pistons, things of that sort. And then I kind of pull it all together. And I have about a dozen of these pre-war BMWs that are, to me, one of the most beautiful engineering artwork pieces that came out of a terrible era in Germany.
It's pretty interesting to me because when I first met you, I went to your car show, and it is a very large event. There were so many Mercedes. It seemed to be a big focus. And then I learned more about the Malcolm Prey Institute and the Revs Institute, and you go to all these car shows with Packards and Delahaye's, but then I go into your garage and I see all these BMW motorcycles, and I'm like, it's pretty down to earth and cool. Like, it's a different
Well,
thing.
you're a bike guy.
Yeah, and I also care a lot about bikes.
Yeah.
I always struggle to understand how people who are never going to be able to afford these vehicles can make a connection. But I suppose, with art, you don't expect someone to be able to buy like a Van Gogh, and you can still go to school for years and study Van Gogh, but
it's a great analogy.
But what do you think, though, about the kids, especially who go through the Prey Institute? How do they connect with, $1 million, $10 million, $50 million cars?
Well, it's such a great question, Matt. And one of the things where Malcolm was a genius is he was an evangelist of success and shared his collection with young people. So we'd get these inner city kids coming in on a bus, and he'd sit them down and talk to them, and then he'd let them into the North Garage first, which is European cars, and then the South Garage was American cars. And the kid's expression when he opened the door, when you see 50 cars just glistening in the lights, and he'd say, go pick the car you want. And he'd let all the kids would scurry to their different cars, and he would let them sit in each car. So, he had a $6.5 million Delahaye, and he'd let a kid sit there and hold the wheel and experience that dream. And I think we've changed lives of these kids because no one else is going to let, at least back then, even today, very few people let kids, jump in these cars. And he was very passionate about that. And we're the same way at the Revs Institute, although our cars, we can't really let them be touched in that same way. But being an evangelist of the industry and allowing these kids to really embrace them, even if they can't afford them, because someday they probably will be able to, right? It's possible.
That's a really good point. I'm so curious about your opinion on what you see as the future of collecting these cars, especially the pre-war ones. Everyone says young people don't care about them. Young people only care about things from the 90s and later. What do you see? How do you see the market going after the election now? I mean, are people going to feel a little more confident spending money on cars?
Well, Hannah, these are great questions. There's a lot to unpack. I guess first I had lunch with Mr. Collier in Naples, and we were talking about the fact that, these Bugattis, the Veyron, and all these very high horsepower supercars that are just capturing kids' imagination. Mr. Collier looked at me and said, do you think in 50 years these cars are going to run? Are they going to be able to be driven? And I don't know the answer to that, but I have to believe no. Given the technological load that these cars have in them, the microchips, all these things, like I don't know how they're going to be able to be run in 50 years. Whereas a Packard V12, I drive my V12 Packard to the market. I go to the farmer's market in Bedford on the weekends. It starts always. It runs great. And interestingly, we just came off of some auction results that are stunning. And I don't know if you guys follow what happens at Hershey in Pennsylvania, but Hershey is predominantly pre-war cars. RM had record sales at Hershey this year. They shattered records with their auctions on pre-war cars. So I think there's cross currents here that are still hard to read, but there are a lot of younger people that are fascinated by the engineering of these incredible brass era cars, the cars from the 30s, the Duesenbergs, the blower Bentleys, all of these like high-tech cars from the era. And I was just at Hilton Head, and there were some just spectacular pre-war cars and young people flocking to them. Whenever I drive my Packard through Bedford, young and old people just gravitate to it probably more than a Bugatti Veyron.
Do you take it to that? There's a car show that Cars and Coffee that everybody goes to. I went.
What's it called?
The Haymarket or something like that?
Hayfields.
There
yeah.
you go.
I love that you're driving your Packard.
Oh, you got to drive everything. Everything needs to run in my garage.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. I really want to drive. You keep inviting me, and
I keep telling.
I really
want to come drive the Packard. You love it.
Is it as easy as driving a regular car? Do you have to do things with the choke,
a little
or do you
timing
have to
advance here and there and all that? But yeah, it's easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's so cool. I never knew that Enzo Ferrari was motivated by the Packard until you told me about it, and then I did a deep dive into it.
Yeah, fascinating. He saw the V12 Packards and revered them, and that became the basis of his architecture for race cars.
My sense this summer was that people were using the election as a reason to not make a purchase on a car. Whether or not it was real or just a useful excuse, I think it depended on the person.
I've even heard that from dealers. I've heard a lot of dealers say the same thing.
BAT also ran, they did not have big auctions closing the last 2 days.
Right. So
Randy told me that.
Do you see that in your own, just your trails and your world? What do you see now that we have the election behind us?
Hannah, I think car passion transcends all politics, all economic indicators. If you really want that car, if you really want that 6-speed, 3-pedal manual, whatever it is, you're going to buy it. You might not buy it this week, but you're going to buy it eventually. And I think most people that are in the industry, in the sport, I call it a sport, not a hobby, it's a sport, they're going to buy these cars whether the Dow is at 42,000 or the Dow's at 16,000. Maybe prices come down. You could argue, though, given real assets and inflation, you could argue that an SL65 Black Series is a great long-term asset to own.
Now you're talking your own book.
I'm talking my own book.
I was going to say, now wait just a second here.
Yeah, you got to talk your own book. Yeah.
Is that by the way at the end of the totally analog era, or does that car is it also packed with chips?
No,
it's
it's
not terribly old.
It's a bi-turbo V12. They're never going to build. Mercedes isn't going to build another car like that again. It's very simple. It's not simple, but it's a 12. It's not.
Did they stop? That's the engine they made for Pagani as well. Do they still make that?
So the Pagani was the original Pagani Zonda had the M120, which is the engine that's in the R129 SL600, the W140 Coupe 600.
Hannah wrote about the R29.
It's a very
R129
great car.
Diana
Bruno Sacco, God rest his soul. He died a couple weeks ago. He designed that car, and he always said it was his favorite. The R129 was the most beautiful car he ever designed. It looks good with the top down. It looks good with the top up, and it looks great with a hard top. It's a rarity. But that M120 V12 it's a normally aspirated, reliable engine. I had an SL, I think it was like a 97 SL 600. I think I put 70,000 miles on it. Never once a problem. Bulletproof.
Wow.
Yeah.
And Diana had the R129, and is that what she first got kind of in trouble for?
I believe that she did.
She did. And I was listening to the podcast the other day
Yeah.
when you were talking about what if the royal family bought a G-Wagen, what would happen? And I thought as I'm listening, I said, well, Diana did buy an R129 in 1990. She had a 500 SL, and she got flack for it. And she gave it back, and believe it or not, if you go to Stuttgart to the Mercedes Museum, the car is in the Mercedes Museum.
There.
It's a red SL, and it's beautiful. Yeah,
it's beautiful. We wrote about the car. She took delivery of it in 1991, And yeah, apparently they made her switch back.
Yeah.
Which is kind of too bad because her taste was spot on.
I mean, really ahead of her time.
By the way, Hannah, you need one repository of all your stories. Like you need to
there
have
is
a Hannah Elliott website that has just
Yes.
your stories.
I
Thank you.
agree.
Well,
Yeah.
Let's
thank
build
you.
it.
Yeah.
Thank you. We can. There is a place where you can click on my name and all of my stories will appear.
And your
we can
travel,
include
Hannah,
that in
I
the-
am blown away by the places you go and the cars you get to drive, from the Cybertruck to Aston Martins. You were just in Zurich, right?
With the Bentley.
Yes.
With the Bentley. And I want to
Yes.
know, I really want to know, because it's my favorite restaurant. How was the Kronenhalle? Did you eat there?
Yes, I did. I ate. I went to the bar a couple times. Loved the bar. Did not love the restaurant, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed, I don't know when the last time you were there, but it seemed a little outdated and the food wasn't great.
Well, it's been outdated since 1945.
I was going to say the best places are
Not-
outdated.
Yeah, no, it's outdated.
Not outdated like Musso and Frank is outdated, which is cool.
They say in German, altmodisch.
Yes,
right?
exactly,
Altmodisch,
yes.
I just thought the food wasn't great. I just thought it wasn't very fresh or flavorful. But the bar was incredible.
Yeah.
I love that it had no music. I love that it was small. I love that it
Intimate.
was wood paneled, and they make a proper martini and a proper boulevardier, which are my two standbys. So I love the Kronenhalle.
I always
Big
think
fan.
the best place, like the Union Club, the best places have bad food.
Yeah, it's so true.
You know, the
Well,
great
ambiance.
atmosphere.
Yeah,
This
bad
is
food.
true.
Probably
I mean,
good cocktails, bad food.
We all have places that we go for things other than the food.
Did you have the
I mean, let's be
schnitzel?
honest.
Because the schnitzel's great.
I did have the schnitzel, and I love a schnitzel. I mean,
Yeah.
you really can't go wrong.
Yeah.
But you can get great schnitzel anywhere, kind of.
True. My favorite
If you're in Germany or Switzerland.
my favorite place is on Moskauer Strasse in Berlin. It's called Jolesch, and they have the most amazing schnitzel.
Hey, you're a Berlin guy.
in
That's where you live
Kreuzberg.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so you like the cars just up to sort of the tech wave of,
Yeah.
I guess, the 90s, right?
I'd
you
say-
like the pre-war stuff.
Yep.
But you also like, I think, you like the E46 M3, which
mean,
I love as well.
Incredible. You saw mine.
Yeah, I saw yours. I always think about, technology, and especially EVs now, but also the technology that came in before. Like, I think about the last time a Porsche didn't have electronic steering, or, these kind of fake tech benefits. Like, that's the edge of where car collecting is going to end, I think.
I think you might be right. Although, how about Porsche with the 911T next year?
I know.
Only in a manual.
I know.
I'm
Can you believe it?
I mean, I
It's
love
so
the
great.
T already. For me, the
I think
T
we
is
gotta
the one
order
to is the one to go with.
Yeah.
The thinking man's 911.
So I don't know if I told you this, but I was at Pebble last year, and I was.
I've never.
Hannah,
been, by
you
the
know
way.
Keith Martin at Sports Car Market, right? Who writes Sports Car Market.
I'm aware of Sports Car Market, yeah.
So he's the publisher, and I was meeting him for dinner somewhere in Monterey, and I walking into the restaurant, and there's this car outside of the restaurant, and I didn't recognize it. And I went over, and there was a guy sitting in the car, and I looked between the seats, and there is a manual in this car. It's brand new. It was a new BMW M2 G87, and I looked at this car, big fat fender flares, 6-speed manual, rear wheel drive, carbon fiber roof, racing seats, the whole thing. I haven't been that excited by a new car in 20 years. I went back to my hotel room. I talked to the guy. He like at Monterey, everybody. He owns 43 cars. He said it's the best car he's ever had. I order it online right then and there. I had to deliver to Greenwich BMW, and it's you guys had this banter the other day about manuals, 3-pedal cars, and how if you buy a 4-cylinder automatic, you've given up on life effectively. And the 6-speed M2 is almost like it's a 2002 Tii meshed with an E30 M3, meshed with an E46, but it's a modern car. And I can't wait to drive it with you because I just got it. They finally delivered it. We got to take it out.
I'm
Oh,
I'm
boy.
excited.
I'll give it to you for a weekend. Take it. It's fabulous.
Oh, that's an offer I can't refuse.
Can we talk about a comment that I might have seen in an email about hoarding parts for some
Yes.
of these cars? Because
Oh, Hannah.
you say hoarding like it's a bad thing. I think it's
Well,
just planning for the
Now,
future.
this isn't about the M2, right? This is
This is
about
not-
more
no,
like your.
This is back to the SL.
So
Yeah.
here's the thing. When you have a car, so let's just take the SL65 Black Series for you. It was made for 8 months in 2008 into 2009. They made 350 worldwide. There are 175 in the U.S. That makes this car way rarer than a gull wing. It was also the first car fully manufactured at Alfalterbach at AMG. It was not built by Mercedes. It was fully built. A lot of carbon fiber, got rid of the drop top, and you can't get parts for it. If you hit a deer with it, there's not a lot you can do with it, right? And I was thinking about the rims, which are just this, staggered, enormous, beautiful wheels, only for that car for 1 year only. And I came across a set of brand new wheels last week that are for sale, which at a bargain, because if you were able to buy them from Mercedes back like 5 years ago, they were like $6,000 a wheel for one rim. And I was yesterday at lunch with Mr. Collier, and I said, Miles, what do you think? Should I stockpile this? He goes, Phil, back in the day, there was a truckload of parts for a 917 Porsche, and I bought all the parts, and I never looked back, and thank God I did. He goes, I would buy those rims because you'll never be able to find them. If you take it out and bend a wheel, what do you do?
Oh, dude, you have to buy them.
So I bought them.
Yes.
I one-clicked them. I got them. They're coming from Italy.
Good.
Yeah.
I have,
Good.
I have a 2007 Ducati S4RS Tricolore. So it's the sort of the pinnacle of the original monster.
Yeah.
And they had problems with tank swelling because the tanks were this composite. They weren't steel, and they would get misshapen. Mine is perfect, but I saw a guy in Japan beats tanks for this specific model, which they only made for 2 years. And I ordered one when the yen was cheap because I figured he's not going to build parts for a 2007 motorcycle that there's only 400 of them anyway forever. I might as well get one of these tanks and hold it just in case, or hoard it, to use your word, just
warehouse
in case.
it.
Yeah, exactly. I think you have to do that, especially if it's a vehicle that you care about that much. And I've been to your place, so I know that you have all your cars like hidden away in a garage that's closed and locked up, and then you have the SL like out displayed in the in the field or in the driveway there. So like you clearly love that vehicle.
Yeah.
And so you have to do anything you can to keep it alive for your kids, right?
Absolutely. And I can't let a bent rim in 2030 sideline the car.
No, or else you're going to have somebody make the new rim for you.
Yeah, I mean, by then maybe 3D print it and there's no problem,
It seems to be a big problem for tires. Hannah and I were talking about Porsche just made new tires for the Carrera GT, right? And
it's a big deal.
I also, I'm right now lusting after a Harley Davidson Fat Bob. They stopped making them last year, and I don't think they're going to make it again. And Avon made a set of tires for that everybody swears by. Now, Avon, I think, has gone out of business, so...
I run Avons on all my pre-war BMWs. They're incredible tire. Great tire.
Such a niche little discussion here. I mean,
Matt, where are you going to keep that tank? Where are you keeping that?
I keep it in my office because it also looks cool.
Office?
It's a hand-beaten,
cool.
bare aluminum tank, and it looks awesome. So I have it, right up next to my first Grateful Dead show stub.
Oh, now
that is the constraining factor here. Once we start, planning ahead, quote unquote, with parts, you start to run out of space.
Well, especially people who live around here. Like, I have no garage space. I'm like putting motorcycles in the house because I can't keep them. I only have, one garage.
So is the Mercedes your forever car, Phil?
Oh, yeah. I would never sell the 65. I first saw it in 2009. Remember when they used to have the Mercedes showroom on Park Avenue?
Yes. And
I was walking out in the middle of the financial crisis. The world was ending. Mercedes is really good at this, right? They launched the 6.9 in the 70s when there was no gasoline. And they were like, I love that car, right? Yeah. And then they launched the 65 Black Series in the middle of the financial crisis. The world's ending. And I'm walking down the street going to Pret to get a sandwich. And I see this SL65 parked in the showroom there, and with a big sold sign on it. And I just couldn't believe my eyes. It was the same feeling I had when I saw a Porsche 959 in person for the first time. So, I mean, Hannah, when you look at a 959 in person, the photographs don't do it justice, right?
It's got an X factor.
It has an X factor that you can't define. And I'm staring at this SL65 through the glass with my head on the glass, and I'm staring at it, drooling on the sidewalk, and people are looking at me, sideways. And I call my best friend who owns a Mercedes dealer in New Jersey, and I said, Scott, what is this car? And he goes, oh, Philip, I only got one. He's like the second largest volume dealer in the country. He only got one, as an allocation. And so I waited patiently. 3 years later, I bought one.
I have to introduce you to Kevin Tynan. who is
yes.
an autos analyst. He used to work for us. Now he's gone to his own shop, I think. But he is obsessive about that period
Yes.
Mercedes and has, I think, a couple of V12s and V8s.
He's almost a
and,
savant, really.
Yeah, he is.
And I just saw his son this weekend, too.
And his son has one, too. And they work
Yes.
on them themselves in
Yes.
their own
Best.
garage.
It's the best.
The tough period there, though, in Mercedes history is, that was during, well, that was at the end. That was after. But that
Before
period,
Daimler Chrysler?
the Chrysler takeover period, there was a lot of bad stuff that went on there and a lot of corners cut. I mean, the R129, for example, in 98, they dropped the M119 4-valve V8 and they put a 3-valve V8 in it. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
Yes, they made mistakes. But for me,
Yeah.
for me personally, the Daimler Chrysler merger of equals
Yes.
was worked out so well because I have and love the Dodge Challenger, which is essentially a Mercedes E-Class.
Oh, yeah.
You know, from the period.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's it. I've never heard you put it that way, Matt.
Well, they used the same platform to make their Challenger, their 300, and
it was
the
based on
Charger.
the
Yeah,
E-Class.
exactly.
So do I need a demon?
Oh, yes.
I
I
do.
mean, I don't think you necessarily need a demon. I think that's overkill. I
Yeah,
think you're
yeah.
fine with a Hellcat.
Yeah.
Because what you want is the supercharger whine. And for me, it's the bad muscle car style. And you're not
But
going to
it
be...
defines that.
Yeah.
It is the bad muscle car style.
It definitely... When you see a Dodge Challenger, you think the dude who's driving it is probably a criminal. You know?
Yes.
Yeah, he's definitely
Agreed.
done time.
Agree.
He's done time.
I need
So-
to ask Philip, going back to, you made a comment and you said that car collecting is a sport, not a hobby.
Yeah.
And I need you to unpack that a little bit. What do you mean by that? And is horse riding a sport or a hobby?
I think depending on the level in equestrian, it can be a hobby. People ride on the weekends and have fun. But at the level I compete at and my peers, it's a full-on sport. I mean, Georgina Bloomberg is a great
course.
competitor. I'm good friends with her, and she's an incredible athlete.
So
Like,
is her
these are
son.
real athletes, people at that level. I mean,
Of
you
course.
have to be
Of course.
fit, and
Yeah.
it's a and
But
and the
why
car,
call car collecting a sport?
Well, I think the industry's evolved. I mean, it used to be a fun hobby, and you'd go to a Sunday car show, and people would drink coffee. And now with Bring a Trailer and all the interesting models that have come out over the last 30 years, and the things to do with them, whether it's you can join private clubs like up
Classic
in
Car
Monticello,
Club Manhattan.
Classic Car Club Manhattan.
Yeah.
It's become
Not the Beverly Hills Car Club.
no.
That's too exclusive.
Not a car
we would
club,
never get
not
in
in
there,
Beverly
Matt. They wouldn't
Hills.
let us in that club. But it's become much more dynamic. And it's not so much a hobby, but it's a real sport. And I think I keep going back to the people you meet, which is so great, but the things you can do with these cars. We ran a Turtle Rally on the off year of the Turtle Invitational, and we went to Cooperstown, and we're hosted by the chairman of the Baseball Hall of Fame, and we stayed at the Otezaga, and we had like 30 amazing cars. We had one guy drove a 55 Speedster that was unrestored. I mean, Magnus would have loved this car, Hannah. It was just an incredible piece of history and leaked like a sieve when it rained. And that's the kind of thing that makes it more like a sport, I think, today.
It's also
competitive.
Yeah.
Oh,
it,
yeah,
like
it's competitive,
cutthroat, right?
Extremely.
And then,
Yeah.
like, I'm treading on Hannah's territory here, but what do you think about McKeel Hagerty coming in and kind of shaking up to some extent the auction business?
Well, I think he did more than just the auction business. I mean, we've had this amazing trend in the industry, and I've written about all of this in Sports Car Market, because when these business transactions happen, they call me to write about it. But we had, RM merged with Sotheby's, right?
That's a long time ago, though.
But that was a big deal, Hannah, right? When that happened, like Rob Myers called
Sure.
me when it happened and said, "Oh my God, like I can't believe this. Like this is a big deal." Then you had Bring a Trailer get bought by Hearst in the middle of the pandemic. Then you've had Gooding, which got bought by Christie's, which just happened. David Gooding sold part of his business. And then you've had these other transactions that have occurred where Hagerty, through a SPAC, went public. So these businesses that support what once was a hobby now is a competitive industry are now real businesses with cash flows, with public shareholders. And McKeel did something very pioneering in taking Hagerty public. And I think there's some board members on Hagerty that were very fluent in all of this and helped him do that. But they bought all these car shows. They've got the Broad Arrow. They've got publications. They obviously have their core insurance business. And I think they've stumbled, here and there. They've had stumbles, and that's to be expected. They're trying to do so much. But it's fascinating, I think, the way business and publicly traded enterprises are being built out of these types of businesses. I mean, even Doug DeMuro, right? Even Doug's websites and YouTube channels have become wildly popular.
Yeah.
And he has an auction site now.
Yeah. Well, he sold it.
Right. I mean, there again.
That's how he
more
bought
of
his
it,
GT.
Yeah.
I will say I thought it was very interesting. I was at the Wynn Concours, and it was probably the first automotive event I've been to in a year that there was no Hagerty signage, no Hagerty sponsorship. I mean, the Wynn obviously doesn't need Hagerty. They're very, very polished, and it was a great show. But it was interesting that Hagerty wasn't there. There was no auction.
Yeah.
So really fascinating.
Wait, were you there for your chauffeur school?
Oh, I am a bona fide Rolls-Royce white glove chauffeur, and I've got the white glove to prove it, too.
I love it.
I think I'm
now,
hired.
Hannah, did you go to the Sphere?
I have not been
The
to
Eagles
the Sphere.
are at the Sphere right
exactly.
now.
And
we should
tickets
all
are,
get on a plane and go there. I saw you two open the Sphere last fall, and I went actually Friday and Saturday night. It's a must.
Oh, that's
I
great.
haven't seen the Sphere or been there, but Hannah and I were talking about this because, at least in my opinion, the Eagles is a band I want to see.
Yes,
I mean,
let's do it.
What is your
but
what's
not
your
at the
top
Sphere.
price? How much
I feel
are you
like the
pay
Sphere is
$500?
a place for U2 makes more sense for the Sphere. The Dead makes sense for the Sphere. The Eagles is just about Don Henley. Like I don't need to.
I think anything in the Sphere is extraordinary. I think I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I think Jimmy Dolan has revolutionized live entertainment.
No, I think you're right.
It is an incredible experience. There were people next to me taking Dramamine. I mean, it was really incredible.
Yeah, I've heard that as well.
Yeah.
I would like to go. I haven't been yet, but I also kind of want to go to Dita Von Teese's show in Vegas, and I didn't
that
go.
would be
I'm going to be back
amazing.
in a few weeks for Formula One, so maybe.
But
maybe
are you
then.
going to tell us about the chauffeur school, or is that saved for
Sure.
another time? Did you write a story on it?
Yes, the story's filed, but maybe we can talk about it when it publishes.
All right. I had one more question. What was I going to ask?
Something about the Eagles,
No.
the Dead,
Don Henley.
No.
Hagerty.
It's completely slipped my mind.
The AMC
That's okay.
Pacer.
Do you like the Pacer?
I think it was ahead of its time, and I think Porsche actually copied it to make the 928.
Really?
I think there's
That's
there's some lineage there that's a little bit similar.
That seems like
I feel like you're
speculation to
dissing
me.
the 928.
No, I had
Yes.
a GTS. I loved it. One of my favorite cars ever.
Dude, risky business when he has
Yeah,
that
the
S4.
GTS is another level, though. The final year car was super car. Beautiful vehicle.
Well, awesome. I really appreciate you coming up from Florida for this. I hope to see you in Bedford soon.
Yes. We'll take the Packard the Packard's in Florida. We'll take the G87 for a blast.
Yeah, I'd love to
You
because
should just take it for a weekend.
I'd spent a
I'll
lot
give
of
it to
time
you.
driving the last generation M2.
Great car.
And that to me it felt super analog. It felt so light. It was so tactile, and the feedback was amazing. And my pulse was pounding, when I was driving it. So I'll be interested to see if they've kept that.
I don't think they have as much, and that's why those cars are seeing such a premium in the market. And everything I've read says the automatic in that car, I think it's a 9-speed, is a way better transmission than the 6-speed manual. But I just couldn't do it.
Oh, it doesn't even
How
matter.
Can you do that?
But why do you don't care about lap times, right?
No, and the thought of having the option of having a 3-pedal car in 2024,
Yeah.
you can't not check that box.
No, I agree 100%.
Yeah.
Co-sign on that.
Yeah.
For sure.
Exactly.
The best color, I love, you got the gray.
The Brooklyn gray.
It's Brooklyn gray. I love that color.
Unavailable next year in the 2025s, by the way.
But I go on the configurator a lot, and I try and figure out which one I'm going to get, and I can never really decide because I also love their red, but I don't want a red car, right?
The red's cool, though. It's not like a flashy show me red.
The blue, the launch edition blue was hot.
Hot. Yeah.
And that's I think, a high quality.
That car, it's the great thing about it. It doesn't have that giant Weber gaping grill that you can, cook barbecue.
Yeah,
on.
the rabbit's tooth.
It's a very small, normal grill. It's the last of. I don't think they're going to build a car like that again.
But
BMW
BMW constantly is bringing out cars that everyone hates initially, and
then
then
they love.
a year later, everyone
Yes.
loves them.
Yeah, that's forward-leaning design.
Yes.
That's what it takes. That's what Bruno Sacco did.
Yes, and I don't even hate that grill.
No, I love it now. But when it first came out, I remember looking at the M3 and thinking, man, I'd rather have just the M340 or whatever because it doesn't have that grill. And now I love that grill.
Yeah, it's all grown on us.
But I can't forgive Chris Bangle. That's an era I will never.
That was a
The
tough
Bangle
era.
butt is not your butt.
No.
No,
Is
the
this what you're
Bangle
saying?
butt. I actually had a very interesting email dialogue with Chris Bangle. He's actually emailable. If you Google his website, he has a private design firm. And I was going to try to get him to come to the Turtle as a design on a panel. And he was really friendly, emailed me back, and we had a dialogue. But you're right. Like, those cars did not stand the test of time.
Yeah.
They just haven't.
No. They don't look good anymore.
No.
And they didn't, I don't think,
when
at
they
the time.
came out. The 6 Series was okay. The convertible M6.
Yeah, but not compared to, in my opinion, the 635 from the 80s, 90s
forget it.
is just like...
That's Paul Brock.
And
that car...
Absolute classic. And that's one of those cars. What's the list that Haggerty publishes? Like their bullish?
Bull list.
The
Yeah.
bull list. I
Yes.
feel like that is a car that could be on there every year because that's underappreciated and it's got to become a highly valued car later on. Dude, I
Great.
appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you. Hannah, thank you.
Thank you. Truly
Really
a pleasure.
fun. I look
Please,
forward to seeing you soon.
Come west. Come west.
I
We've
do
got lots of
frequently. I'll
cars
look
out
you
here.
up.
Please do.
Okay.
Thanks.
I remembered what I want to ask, and I think it's a good
Hannah,
question
we're back.
for
We're
Philip.
back,
Okay.
I think it's a good question for Philip.
I was in the elevator, but I'm back.
I remembered what I wanted to ask, and it is your profession, which is, finance, right?
Investment management.
Investment management, and your sport, which is car collecting, right? They sometimes dovetail, although we rarely talk about it on, my markets show. I remember when you mentioned the GTO, and this is what brought it to my mind, the drummer for Pink Floyd, Nick Mason.
Yeah, he has a GTO.
Has a GTO and a big collection. And in fact, they started a fund that the public could buy into for
there's
car collecting.
several people doing
And I
this.
met somebody at, what's the Hamptons? The Bridge.
The Bridge, a great show.
I met somebody at the Bridge who had an F40, and he was trying to do the same thing.
Well, they had Rally Road, which was an early pioneer in this.
I loved Rally
Bloomberg
Road.
covered
Yeah,
that.
But now there's other
I
limited
bought a
partnerships.
piece of a 512, and I have no idea what happened to my account.
But
It's
you still own that right blinker.
Right. So, do you think that there could be a fund or an ETF, for example, that collects cars and it could be successful? Or is there some barrier to making that happen on a regular basis? Because I never really see it.
Well, I can tell you, if somebody came up with this idea, 10 years ago and bought up a lot of these Ferraris, whether it was, F40s or 288 GTOs or even 250 short wheelbases, the multiplier on those vehicles has been venture capital-like. Some of these cars 20 years ago were trading for $100,000, $200,000. They're now multi-million-dollar cars. I don't know if we're going to have that kind of growth unless inflation really takes off, which is possible, where these assets will reprice as real assets into a declining value of paper currency. I think there's a place for it for sure. Depends on who runs it and how they think about it and the quality of the asset bases and what they're buying and how good they are. It's bird dogging out which cars are going up in value. Again, though, I tend to feel like this sport is about passion, and a lot of those GTO owners, they do drives together, through Italy and through different parts of the world. They ship the cars globally and have fun together. Owning a piece of a car, I don't know.
But
I'm lukewarm on it, to be honest.
Not as fun.
I'm lukewarm on it.
Right, because I'm just thinking, doesn't anyone ever come to Hollowbrook and say, hey, you do investment management for me, and you know a lot about cars. Why don't we start a car collection together that's an investment?
Yeah, I've been approached by several pretty sophisticated people. GT Motor Cars, J.R. Montea is doing that right now, and he's in the beginning nascent stages of that. And yeah, it's a good idea. And we help clients manage selling collections, buying collections. We advise them on taxes and how to handle that. But it might be more of my negativity on this, Matt, might be more of a valuation issue, because I feel like the collector car market is fully valued right now. It's sort of like, imagine the S&P, right? If the S&P was trading at 12 times earnings, none of us would have cash in our accounts at all. We'd be fully invested. But here at like 24 times earnings, it feels toppy and full, right? So maybe if there's a big correction and you can buy that F40 for $1.5 million instead of $4 million or $3 million, fund might be interesting.
I will say there are guys who co-own cars. It's just not as formal as what you're describing, but I know plenty of people in LA who share ownership of a car that they plan to own for a while and then sell and split the profits.
Yeah.
It just seems to me that it's always something I hear about people doing in, let's say, the private markets, right?
Yes.
And now is a time when private markets have become so in vogue. Everybody wants in on private markets. And in fact, a lot of companies aren't going to go public because they're doing better and they can be traded in a private market.
And they don't have to do SEC filings every quarter and deal with analysts and have quarterly calls and all that.
Exactly. But I know there must be some reason why we don't have ETFs that are car collections. And I know Rally Road was a fun idea, but it didn't really take off.
It didn't.
Right?
But an ETF is an interesting concept, because what Bring a Trailer has done, it's brought unbelievable liquidity into the market. And when you look at the scatter plots, if you put in, let's say Audi R8 6-speed manual, and you can look at the scatter plot of what they've traded for.
True, I love that. Yeah.
You have an incredible. It's no different than looking at a stock on Bloomberg and what it's traded at historically. So why couldn't there be an ETF? It's a good point. I mean, I'm not against it. I just.
Well, no, there has to be a reason why no one does it. Otherwise, someone would have done it 10 years ago. Yeah,
there's been a lot of attempts at funds, and some have been launched and some probably have been successful. But it's probably not that scalable. I mean, you do have high expense ratios because you got to store the cars, you got to service the cars.
It's the scalability that's the issue.
Insure the cars, right?
Every few years, somebody will launch a fund. A car fund or a wine fund or an art fund.
Yes.
And we'll have that person on Bloomberg Business Week and we'll talk to them about it on the radio, and it's so fun to do for a segment. But it never takes off enough that it makes it to the mainstream financial news. And, excellent. I'm glad I remembered that final question, because
that was a really good question.
Well, it's something that I sort of come up against every couple of years. Someone always has a fund that he wants to launch and he wants to talk about on the show, and I'm into it, but it just never picks up.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things where it is like a good idea in theory, but then somehow it doesn't translate, and I just keep thinking actually people do kind of want to drive or at least sit in their car.
Totally. That's why I think Rally Road, I don't think it really took off. I know it's still a viable business, and they've gone into other kind of things. So you can own, I guess, part of
watches.
Exactly, or Michael Jordan's Nikes from whatever, But I wonder what the most valuable car collection in the world is. Is Jay Leno's car collection worth more than any other, or is Ralph Lauren's car collection worth more than those guys?
I'd be so curious.
They must see it in some respects as an investment, right?
For sure, but think of all the people in Asia and the Middle East that have hundreds.
Oh, true,
of
the
cars.
Sultan of Brunei.
Completely, those guys and those are so low key. I mean, I would be very surprised if someone in China or the Middle East didn't have a really, really expensive. China, meaning Hong Kong.
And they're not inviting the Lebowski little
and
achievers.
they're not inviting the YouTubers to come over and shoot their cars.
I bet you Shmi is sometimes sneaking into some Saudi's collection.
Well, if anyone could do it, he could do it.
All right, that does it for us this week. Join us same time, same place next week. I'm Matt Miller.
And I'm Hannah Elliott, and this is Bloomberg.